Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our Midrash for Parashat Lech Lecha. And this week we're going to be talking about Avraham, his son Ishmael, and the three measures of meal. We're going to lay some groundwork, and we'll talk about the three measures of meal again next week. And I do apologize. There's a good bit of noise outside. So there's nothing I can do about it. It's an Esavite culture. So we'll just do our best, and hopefully we can get some noise reduction. But one of the things before we begin, we need to understand, just before we get to the Torah section, what we want to understand from Bereshit or Genesis 1 and verse 1. We're told that in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and there was a darkness on the face of the deep. Now, we understand this as both a physical and a spiritual darkness. However, the spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters to take something spiritually dark and to bring something good out of it, and to set something good apart from the rest of the things which were dark. Verse 3, then Elohim said, let there be light. And we understand this as a spiritual light. And there was light, and Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim divided the light, the spiritually good things, from the darkness, which is that which is common and profane. So we come to Bereshit chapter 2 and verse 15. We're told that Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and to keep it. And as we've talked about many times, the purpose of this was so that we would together form a single family of man who would take care of each other first, so we could then turn and take care of him together as a family. But we didn't want to do that. We fell spiritually in just so many ways. So we've seen this slide before. We're talking about Jacob's ladder, so to speak, back up to heaven. Well, what happened was, of course, we didn't live up to the fullest of our potential there in the Garden of Eden. All we had to do was to hear Yahweh's voice and do what he said. But instead we had our own thoughts. So we went meshugar, so to speak. Well, that led to a fall. So you can't be double-minded and live in Elohim's house. Again, I apologize for any noise. It's out of control this week, but we'll just do our best and praise Yah. So effectively, our forefathers fell down to the bottom bargain basement, so to speak. So watch your episode number 1 in Genesis 3, tripped us up, and then watch your episode number 2 in chapter 6, left us with the Nephilim. Well, so then last week we had Parashat Noach, where we talked about the flood, the purpose of which, or one of the purposes of which, was to wipe out the Nephilim. So praise Yahweh, those giant clans are now gone, although we know that there were more afterward. But now we have demons on the earth who are the dead spirits, they're the live spirits of the dead Nephilim, but now they're seeking re-embodiment. Only they don't have a rightful place in this realm, but they still want to get agreement that they can have embodiment. So we have all these problems now. And last week we saw that there is a problem with disobedience of the fifth commandment, respecting father and mother in the line of Ham. So Ham begat Cush, who begat Nimrod, who began to become a mighty one on the earth. And then we ended up with the Tower of Babel incident. We'll talk about those in just a moment. Well, the next step up on the ladder, so first we have Adam, who didn't obey. Then we had Noah, who obeyed to save himself and his family. Next we have Avram, later Avraham, and we're going to see Avram obeyed Yahweh even though it cost him a lot and threatened to cost him almost everything. So Avram took the faith and moved obedience to Yahweh back up significantly. However, we're going to have some other issues, particularly Ishmael. We're going to see Ishmael again during the millennium. So everyone pray for Ishmael. So, but in Bereshit or Genesis chapter 10 and verse 6, we saw that the sons of Ham were Cush. Cush begat Nimrod, and Nimrod is the one who elevated himself made an elitist out of himself, and began to behave like a top-down mighty one on the earth. Okay, well, he was a mighty hunter of men's souls, so to speak, before Yahweh, meaning in Yahweh's face. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter in Yahweh's face. So, Nimrod was a very proud man, and he wasn't a servant of servants to his brothers. He wasn't trying to do service to all of mankind. Rather, he was only looking out for his own selfish interest. He was elevating himself above his brethren in mankind. So he is the first one to establish the pattern. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. Well, after Nimrod, he has his empire and expands his empire, first in Shinar and meaning Samaria, and then extending into Assyria. And now we have the Tower of Babel incident. Okay, this is again in Shinar. So what are we doing here? We're trying to elevate ourselves. We're trying to exalt ourselves against Yahweh, in Yahweh's face, so to speak. And what's the purpose? The purpose is to make a monument to ourselves. That we can we're not making a monument to Yahweh, we're making a monument to ourselves, to make a name for ourselves, the name meaning power. So we can be powerful because we've made this temple. And because we make this temple, we will be empowered to not be scattered. So we don't need to obey Yahweh. We can rebel against Yahweh, just like King Nimrod said. Well, so what's the solution to all this mess? Well, the next step up in the ladder is Avraham, later Avraham. So we come to Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 27. We see Avraham team up with Lot, and they leave Ur of the Chaldeans. So Avraham takes Sarai as his wife, and they, again, in this map, they begin around what we would call Iraq, what we call Iraq today. So that's the land of Sumer, or anciently and biblically is called Shinar. So then they prepare to come to the promised land. So here we have, again, in Shinar, in Sumer, we have Ur of the Chaldees, Ur Kasdim. So right there, it's in the same area as Babylon, Kish or Cush, Uruk or Iraq, and Ur of the Chaldees. So Avraham has plenty of challenges. So we come to Bereshit chapter 11, starting in verse 30. Sarai was barren. She had no child. That happens a lot to faithful women of Scripture. Verse 31, and Terah took his son Avraham and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Avram's wife, and they all went out with them from Ur the Chaldees, from Ur Kasdim, to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. And Terah died in Haran. And so now we're ready to begin our Torah portion. So we come to chapter 12, and Yahweh had said to Avraham, get out from your country, get out from your family, and leave your father's house and go to a land that I will show you. So you're going to listen to me and do what I say instead of doing what you think is best for you. And if you will listen to me like that and obey me like that, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name or your power or your strength great, and you shall be a blessing. He says, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Well, so we are not supposed to curse the children of Avraham. So in this light, again, we bring to people's attention the fact that Orthodox Judaism requires, by the Talmud, to curse Christians and to pray for their deaths. And that includes Nazarenes, Messianics, doesn't matter what you call yourself. If you follow Yeshua in any way, Orthodox Judaism is required to curse you by the Talmud. So you can find this in Wikipedia under the Birchat Haminim. It's kind of thick language, but it's well worth digging into and reading, and talking about anyone Orthodox Judaism doesn't like as an apostate. So, and they pray that there be no hope for us, and to uproot the kingdom of arrogance speedily and in our days. And it says, may the Nazarenes and the other sectarians, or the minim, perish as in a moment, and let them be blotted out of the book of life and not be written together with the righteous, which to them means those who obey the Talmud rather than the Tanakh. And he says, you are praised, O Adonai, who subdues the arrogant, meaning those who want to follow the Tanakh. And it says, this is embedded in a baraita of the tractate on blessings, which is tractate Berachot 28b through 29a, the backside of page 28 and the front side of page or leaf 29, written during the Mishnaic period. Well, and then what you have to realize is that in theory, Orthodox Judaism holds that the Talmud is almost or at least as important as the Torah of Moshe. But in practice, they treat the Torah of Moshe and the Tanakh like a disposable throwaway document. So its only function in Orthodox Judaism is seen as providing a legal precedent, so to speak, for them to launch. It's a launch pad for the Talmud, effectively. So we don't know what else to say about that, but we are not supposed to curse other sons of Avraham. And I would believe that would even include Esav. So why is Judah cursing Joseph? Now, we understand that certain things are destined to pass with regards to Esav. They come from Yahweh. We can't say anything about it. It's not up to us to say anything about it or to comment on it, except Yahweh's will be done. However, Judah also praying for Joseph's death, that isn't Genesis 12 and verse 3 compliant. So, moving on, we come to verse 6. Avraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. Okay, so what did Avraham do? Did he just go to the land? Or what did he do in the land? Okay, well, instead of building a monument to himself, Avraham built monuments to Yahweh. Instead of building his own fame, Avraham worked to build the fame of Yahweh. Verse 7, then Yahweh appeared to Avraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to Yahweh who had appeared to him. So he's building an altar to Yahweh and not any kind of a monument for himself. Verse 8, and he moved from there to the mountain east of Beit El, and he pitched his tent with Beit El on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to Yahweh and called on the name of Yahweh. He's serving Yahweh. He's glorifying the name of Yahweh. He's not doing things for himself. He's seeking to do things for Yahweh. And this is so important, and that people can understand this, because Avraham is the first one who was attempting to reestablish the kind of treatment. He treated other people the way we all would like to be treated. And we see Avraham giving and pouring and giving out of himself. So Yahweh sees this, Yahweh knows this, Yahweh respects this, and Yahweh will bless this. So he moved from there to the mountain east of Beit El and pitched his tent with Beit El on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to Yahweh and called on the name of Yahweh. So Avraham journeyed, going on still toward the south. He didn't stick around that monument. He even wanted to go other places and make yet other monuments. Then he went on his journey from the south as far as Beit El, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Beit El and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Avraham called on the name of Yahweh. He's not exalting his own name, he's exalting Yahweh's name through his actions, through his deeds, and through his words. So we come to chapter 13 and verse 6, and the land was not able to support both Avram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Avram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So one of the great things about Avram is that Avram gives preference to others. That's the concept of humility in Hebrew, is that you give preference even to those who are inferior to you. So chapter 13 and verse 8, Avram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we're brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I'll go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I'll go to the left." He's giving preference to Lot, and Yahweh blesses him greatly for it. So we come down to verse 14, and Yahweh said to Avram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever." And here, we're talking both houses, and we're also talking Ishmael. Again, Esav won't make it in. Esav will not survive the tribulation time that's coming, but Ishmael will, and there will also be a remnant of Ishmael brought in. That's one of the things that's being prophesied here, or promised here. Verse 16, "And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you." So chapter 13 and verse 18, "Then Avram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to Yahweh as well." So he builds altars, he builds monuments to Yahweh in Yahweh's land. He's not even building anything for himself yet. So now we come to chapter 14, and there is war, and it's a big war. So in verse 1, you have these four very large northern armies, one of which is Shinar or Sumer or Iraq, and then you have these ancient kingdoms that effectively come from part of Turkey and then also part of southwestern Iran. And these four large kingdoms come together, and they make war against, well, what they do is they perform a regional sweep. They perform a large campaign we'll talk about in just a moment. And eventually, during the campaign sweep, they come upon these five kings of the cities of the plain. So what they did is they came down from the north. If you can imagine this, they came down from the north, and then I'm probably doing this the wrong way. Okay, here to synchronize. They came down from the north, and then they looped around the south of the Salt Sea, and then they came back up the west side. And then at some point, the kings of the five smaller kings of the plain had to engage. They were very badly beaten. So if you want to know more about this subject, for full disclosure, I have not had time to watch this full video. I scanned it quickly. It seems to be a rehash of some earlier videos that I've seen, some footage of Ron Wyatt's discoveries. He was a Seventh-day Adventist brother. We believe all of his discoveries are legitimate. For those that don't know, I mean, everyone's free to form their own opinion about geographic discoveries and this kind of a thing. But for those that don't know, he was a Seventh-day Adventist brother. We believe the Noah's Ark. We believe he also found the Red Sea crossing site, Sodom and Gomorrah, and some other things. The only thing that we don't believe is the Ark of the Covenant. And we don't want to get into the full details here, but basically bottom line is that Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah chapter 3 and verse 16, tells us that in the end of days, when we are multiplied and increased in the land, we won't even talk about the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh anymore. So we're not going to think about it. We're not going to visit it. It shall be made anymore. So I don't know why that particular discovery would be so important, but The other, we'll just leave it there, but we do agree with his other discoveries. So come to verse 12, these 4 invading northern armies, they also took Lot. So he was Avram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and all his goods, and departed. So then one who had escaped came and told Avram the Hebrew, for they were allies with Avram. So Avram, verse 14, when he heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So Avram was a rich man to have that many trained servants. And he divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. And if you think about this raid, 318 trained men, and we don't know how large those other armies were, but probably in the tens of thousands or something on that order. So Yahweh gave Avram a miraculous victory and a miraculous deliverance. Verse 16, so he brought back all the goods and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. So praise Yahweh for the success. Then chapter 14 and verse 18, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was priest of Elohim Most High. And he blessed Avram and said, blessed be Avram of Elohim Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be Elohim Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. So Avram is not afraid to support Yahweh's kingdom. And notice this is the same man. He's built several altars himself. He calls on the name of Yahweh himself, and yet he understands the need for an ordered and organized priesthood to serve Yahweh. And he's not afraid to put his resources where it counts. So because of all these things, because of Abraham's faithfulness, because of his desire to hear Yahweh's voice and do what Yahweh said, he became the friend of Yahweh. So chapter 15 and verse 1, after all these things, after all these acts of faithfulness, the word of Yahweh came to Avram in a vision, saying, don't be afraid, Avram. I am your shield. I am your exceedingly great reward. And I just wonder sometimes if we stop and think about that, do we understand that Yahweh is our reward? You know, because so many times you hear people talking about how they're going to, they need a new car, so they're going to go ask Yahweh. They need a new house, so they're going to go ask Yahweh. They need a new job. And I'm not saying that people don't have needs, but in some of these denominations, particularly the prosperity gospel ones, where is the focus? Is the focus on us serving Yahweh and asking things so that we can serve him better together? Or are we asking amiss so that we can spend it on our own lusts? So we have to think carefully, because we can choose the path of self-delusion, and Elohim will let us. So we all need to be careful not to choose that pathway. But after these things, the word of Yahweh came to Avram in a vision, saying, don't be afraid, Avram. I am your shield, and I am your exceedingly great reward. So when you die, there's going to be something great for you because you're listening for my voice and doing what I say to do. But Avram said, Adonai Yahweh, what will you give me, seeing as I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? You said that I would become an exalted father, Avram. So what will you give me here? Because I don't have any heir. And Avram said, look, you've given me no offspring. Indeed, one who is born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, saying, this one, Eliezer, shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Verse 5, and he brought him outside and said, look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed in Yahweh, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. Verse 7, and he said to him, I am Yahweh, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees, Ur Kasdim, to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Adonai Yahweh, how shall I know that I will inherit it? So now he's going to cut a covenant, verse 9. And he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And there's all kinds of commentary about why these particular animals. Verse 10, and he brought all these to him and cut them into down the middle and placed each piece opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds into. So we understand that as Avraham cut the animals into, he would have walked between the parts himself. So now all that remains is for Yahweh to pass between the parts. Verse 11, and when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Avraham drove them away. So we're still looking at the symbolism here. Vultures being an unclean bird representing an unclean spirit. So whatever the sacrifice that has been made, there will be unclean vultures trying to come and partake of it. But Avraham drove them away. Well, this brings to mind the episode in Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah chapter 34, starting in verse 8. And this is where King Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people who were at Jerusalem to proclaim liberty to them in order to return and be in Yahweh's favor. And he commanded that every man should set free his male and female Hebrew slaves, and that no one should keep a Jewish brother in bondage. Now, when all the princes and all the people who had entered into the covenant, they heard that everyone should set free his male and female slaves, and that no one should keep them in bondage anymore, they obeyed and they let them go. Good, that's what we're supposed to do. Verse 11, but afterward they changed their minds, and they made the male and female slaves return, whom they had set free, and brought them into subjection as male and female slaves. So they're back in slavery again. Well, Yahweh didn't like it. And so now we see the meaning of a covenant. So verse 15, then you recently turned and did what was right in my sight, every man proclaiming liberty to his neighbor, and you made or cut a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. So you would have animals, and they would have been divided, and those who want to enter into the covenant would pass between the parts. This is verse 16. Then you turned around and profaned my name, because every one of you brought back his male and female slaves, whom he had formerly set at liberty at their pleasure, but you brought them back into subjection to be your male and female Hebrew slaves again. Verse 17, therefore, thus says Yahweh, you have not obeyed me in proclaiming liberty, everyone to his brother and everyone to his neighbor. Therefore, behold, I proclaim liberty to you, says Yahweh, to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine, and I will deliver you to trouble among all the kingdoms of the earth. Verse 18, and I will give the men who have transgressed my covenant, who have not performed the words of the covenant which they made before me, when they cut the calf in two and passed between the parts of it, the princes of Judah, the princes of Jerusalem, the eunuchs, the priests, and all the people of the land who passed between the parts of that calf, I will give them into the hand of their enemies and into the hand of those who seek their life. Their dead bodies shall be meat for the birds of the heaven and the beasts of the earth. The message being, if you don't obey the covenant, you end up like the lamb that was cut in two and sacrificed, that all the people passed between the parts. So now we come back to the main narrative in Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 15, starting in verse 12. Now, Avraham has been chasing the vultures away from the cut parts, and he's already passed between them himself. But now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Avraham, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Then Yahweh said to Avraham, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And people say, well, why did they have to get afflicted? What did they do besides be born into slavery? Well, Many times we have a similar walk in the body of Mashiach. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 29 says, "For to us it has been granted on behalf of Mashiach Nagid, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake, having the same conflict which you saw in me and now here is in me." So this is a very important verse to understand. We're called not only to believe in him, but we're also supposed to make living sacrifices. We're supposed to resist persecution, we will see in the parables coming up. And if we're not willing to make those sacrifices, then how do we claim to be his servants? Verse 14, "Also the nation whom they serve I will judge, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions." So this could be a prophetic foreshadowing of what will come also after the collapse of Babylon at trumpet 7. Verse 17, "And it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces." So we know that Yahweh is a consuming fire and that many times he manifests as fire. Verse 18, "And on that same day, Yahweh made a covenant with Avraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates." So, and in this context, we're talking about the remnant of Judah, the remnant of Joseph, and the remnant of Ishmael that comes in during the millennium. So we come now to chapter 16, and Sarai, Avram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So she said to Avram, "See now, Yahweh has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Avram heeded the voice of Sarai. Verse 3, "Then Sarai, Avram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Avram to be his wife." Okay, so that's important. So her legal status changed from being that of a maidservant. Now so a concubine is still a legal wife. So she has limited rights, similar to a prenuptial agreement, perhaps. But in verse 3, she was given to be a wife. This was after Avram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. Verse 4, "So he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes." Verse 5, "Then Sarai said to Avram, My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. Yahweh judge between you and me." So Avram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand." So her legal status has now reverted back to being that of a maid. "Do to her as you please." And there's all sorts of commentary about that. But Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, so she fled from her presence. Verse 7, "The messenger of Yahweh found her by a spring of water in the wilderness and said, Where have you come from and where are you going?" And she said, "I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai." Now, we've spoken before about Ramban's commentary on Genesis 12 and verse 6. So he tells us that whatever has happened to the patriarchs is a sign or a portent for the children. That is to say that events that we see, particularly in the Torah, especially in Genesis, tend to repeat themselves again and again throughout time. So these same patterns will come to pass more than once. Verse 9, "The messenger of Yahweh said to her, Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand." So some people see this as an indication that the remnant of Ishmael will come in during the millennium. "Then the messenger of Yahweh said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the messenger said to her, Behold, you are with child, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because Yahweh has heard your affliction, Ishmael. And he shall be a wild man, His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all of his brethren. Now, just to contrast, so Ishmael was to be a wild man. We see in Bereshit, or Genesis 25 and verse 27, that Esav was a man of the field, but Yaakov was a complete man, Ishtam, so a complete man, or an urbane man who dwells in tents. So when Ishmael joins, and if anyone converts from Esav, we have to become complete men dwelling in tents. Verse 13, so then she called the name of Yahweh who spoke to her, you are the El who sees. So verse 15, Hagar bore Avraham a son, and Avraham named his son whom Hagar bore Ishmael. And Avraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Avraham. Now let's go to chapter 17 and verse 1, and we add 13 more years. So when Avraham was 99 years old, Yahweh appeared to Avraham and said to him, I am El Shaddai, walk before me and be blameless. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Then Avraham fell on his face, and Elohim talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. So here we're talking Jewish, Christian, Muslim at this point. No longer shall your name be called Avram, but your name shall be Avraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. So Avram, exalted father, Avraham, father of many nations. He says, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I'll make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be Elohim to you and to your descendants after you, Judah, remnant of Joseph, remnant of Ishmael. And this is all because Avram listened for Yahweh's voice and did what Yahweh told him to do. He was the friend of Yahweh in that way. Verse 8, also I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their Elohim. And Elohim said to Avram, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. So what does it mean to keep his covenant? And are we really? He says, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised. And you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. But the reason he received this covenant is because he was hearing and obeying Yahweh's voice. Verse 12, he who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant. So Ishmael, I believe, the most popular age for circumcision is 7 years of age, but there's different traditions. So Ishmael was originally circumcised at 13 years of age. Now he's circumcised. Well, now they commonly circumcise at 7 years of age, but the Torah commandment is 8 days of age. And that's when the immune system is at its peak with a newborn. Verse 14, and the uncircumcised male child who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. He's not obeying what Yahweh says to do. He's not hearing and obeying Yahweh's voice, including his written commandments. Well, we often get questions from Christians and even Messianics about what is the need for physical circumcision after Yeshua's sacrifice. And we can understand these kinds of questions. For example, I was raised in the Protestant church, and I was taught that the Yeshua's sacrifice meant that the law was now nailed to his cross, and that things like physical circumcision, that those were perhaps good for hygiene, but they weren't really necessary anymore. So Esav is very active in teaching that you don't need to obey Yahweh's commandments. So for those of us who were brought up in the house of Esav and are just now learning the truth, one of the things that we can point to is here in the prophets. So Yehezkel or Ezekiel chapter 44 and verse 9. Now, in context, this is the upcoming fourth temple. Now, right now we've had two temples, and we're waiting on the third temple, which will be a rabbinic, Talmudic, anti-Yeshua temple. But this here in Ezekiel, Yehezkel, is the fourth temple, which now this is after the tribulation, after Armageddon, after the ingathering, and during the start of the millennium. That's this time frame. So this means both houses are there together in the land. I'm not sure what percentage of Ishmael has already come into the land at this point. But in verse 9, it says, "Thus says Adonai Yahweh, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart or uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter my sanctuary, including any foreigner who is among the children of Israel." Now, to me, this is a very clear reference to the house of Ephraim or Joseph. He's speaking to the foreigners who come into his covenant. So that's effectively Joseph. So he's saying if we're not physically circumcised, we cannot enter the fourth temple. That's what this means. So what does this say about our good Heavenly Father's heart regarding physical circumcision and circumcision of the heart? Well, now, another thing that happens in the church a lot is that the church will teach you to use the words of Paul to do away with the words of Jesus, effectively. That's what they do. So we have some studies as far as why that's not a good practice. One of those studies is found in Nazarene Scripture Studies, Volume 3, called Making Sense of Circumcision. And we just basically go through and show what do Shaul's words say and how are they incorrectly interpreted and what do they really say. So it's sort of, in addressing it, I hate to say it just exactly in this way, but there are traditions in the house of Ephraim, just like there are traditions in the house of Judah. And both of these sets of traditions violate the face value of Yahweh's word in the Tanakh and also in the renewed covenant. So recommend this study. You can also find this same information in the Nazarene Israel study. We have several studies on this. You can just type circumcision in the search bar. But coming back to the history, chapter 17 and verse 15, then Elohim said to Avraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai," which means similar to princess or headmistress, headmastress. However, but Sarah shall be her name, which is more like queen or regal. It says, "And I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her." So Avraham fell on his face and laughed and said, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." Then Elohim said, "No, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Yitzhak. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant and with his descendants after him." Now, again, we're talking about the remnant of Judah, remnant of Joseph, and the remnant of Ishmael. So, however, Ishmael has to come through Mashiach Nagid, which belongs to the house of Judah, also not to the house of Joseph. So both, well, everyone has to come through Mashiach Nagid because that's his function and purpose. Now, again, why is Yitzhak being so blessed? As we will see in upcoming portions in chapter 26 and verse 4, Yahweh says, "I will give you all of these blessings because Avraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." You know, the Torah of Moshe was not yet given at this point. So what this means is Avraham was listening for Yahweh's voice, and sought to obey everything that Yahweh ever said. So if we are children of Avraham, so as to be heirs to his promises, then shouldn't we also be seeking to do this as best as we can? Verse 20 says, "And as for Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes," and there are 12 traditionally Islamic kingships, "and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Yitzhak, whom Sarah shall bring forth to you at this set time next year." So again, everyone has to come through Mashiach Nagid. Verse 22, "Then he finished talking with him, and Elohim went up from Avraham. So Avraham took Ishmael his son and every male and circumcised the flesh of their foreskins that very same day, as Elohim had said to him." Now, we get this question from time to time. There are some places where it's not legal to do circumcision, or there's prohibitions, rather. There's also concern that there may come a time when circumcision is prohibited. So this is we're providing this in information-only status. We strongly recommend you to have a professional to do the job. Every so often you hear horror stories about someone who attempts this themselves, that it doesn't work, so they botch the job. So I'm not saying it's not possible to do. This is a case study of someone who did it himself. The thing about ancient circumcision, we believe it was circumcision in the foreskin rather than removing the whole foreskin. It allows for much more rapid healing, which would be especially important if someone was older. So, for example, in chapter 17 and verse 24, Avraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. So a minimally invasive procedure, cutting away less flesh, heals much more rapidly, much more quickly. Again, we just recommend having a professional do it. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. So now we come to our Haftarah prophetic portion. So we look up on Wikipedia, Lech Lecha, the Haftarah, and it just gives comments on the Haftarah. It says, the specific text read following Parashat Lech Lecha varies according to different traditions within Judaism. We have been following the Ashkenaz tradition just to see where it goes and to speak to Judah's concerns as well. We see that they recommend Yeshayahu or Isaiah 40 and 41. We just did that. I'm not sure how many parashiot to go, but not that many. So rather than do that, let's talk about what's going to happen for Ishmael in prophecy. Now, one very important thing coming up here. So Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 19, starting in verse 16. It tells us that in that day, now we're speaking of end time wars. We don't know exactly when, but Egypt will be like women and will be afraid and fear because of the waving of the hand of Yahweh of hosts, which he waves over it. And the land of Judah will be a terror to Egypt. Everyone who makes mention of it will be afraid in himself because of the counsel of Yahweh of hosts, which he has determined against it. So one wonders, is that Yahweh's way of referring to the Dunmeh? We'll talk about the Dunmeh in just a moment. Verse 18 says, in that day, 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan and swear by Yahweh of hosts. So Egypt will convert. One will be called the city of destruction, and in that day there will be an altar to Yahweh in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to Yahweh at its borders. So Egypt is going to give worship and praise to Yahweh. Verse 20, and it will be a sign and for a witness to Yahweh of hosts in the land of Egypt, where they will cry to Yahweh because of the oppressors, and he will send them a savior and a mighty one, and he will deliver them. Verse 21, then Yahweh will be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians will know Yahweh in that day, and will make sacrifice and offering. Yes, they will make a vow to Yahweh and perform it. Now, we don't know exactly what role the Abraham Accords play in this, but we, in general, we're very much in favor of the Abraham Accords because it provides a structural foundation for the repair of relationships between the three measures of meal: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, we spoke about the Dunmei recently. We spoke about this a little before, but just to refresh, the Dunmei were a group of crypto Jews following Shabtai Tzvi. They were forced to convert to Islam, but they secretly remained practicing Judaism. So very similar to the Jesuits, just on the Muslim side. So again, we don't know exactly what role they presently play in government, but we know that this is the kind of thing that the line of Zerah does. They infiltrate everyone and everything. That's why they're the kingship tribe. Verse 22, and Yahweh will strike Egypt. He will strike and heal it. They will return to Yahweh, and he will be entreated by them and heal them. And in that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian will come into Assyria, and the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. And in that day, Israel will be one of three with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the land, whom Yahweh of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed is Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. And now, this is the physical aspect that we're thinking about. Let's consider the spiritual aspect. This is a series of 8 empires that have oppressed Israel throughout time. Now, we can look at this both in the physical, but there's also a spiritual aspect. Now, this list has many things in common. All of these empires were polytheistic. That means that they all had a pantheon. When we're talking about a pantheon, effectively, we're talking about the worship of the fallen watchers, or we're talking about demon possession from the spirits that were left over by the Nephilim drowning in the flood, but probably the worship of the fallen watchers. So to begin with, let's start in position number 3. Most of us are more familiar with Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue in Daniel chapters 2 and 7. So we have Babylon is the head of gold, and that's, of course, Judah is still in Babylon. Judah reads the Babylonian Talmud. Judah replaces the Tanakh with the Babylonian Talmud. So that's why he's effectively in charge. The kingship tribe is going to gravitate to the head. He's going to gravitate to the gold, because that's a function of kingship: lawyers, gold, guns, and money. So then you have Media Persia is the chest and arms of silver. Then you have Greece is the belly and thighs of bronze. Greece, of course, had a pantheon. Rome adopted the same pantheon, the same worship of the fallen watchers, just changed the name. And then you have a split. We don't have time to unpack the whole thing here, but there are 2 legs of iron with Rome, and then there's the feet. We don't have time to unpack all of it. But effectively, with the split, we see the Ottoman Islamic Caliphate, or should we say a renewed Ottoman Islamic Caliphate, to be one manifestation. Another manifestation is Protestantism, because Protestantism is effectively an extension of Rome. So there are many, many Josephites that are lost in Protestantism right now that will be freed from Protestantism, that they will see the truth at Armageddon. But in the meantime, as long as they're still following an Esavite church system or an Esavite messianic system, instead of returning back to Yeshua's system, which builds his kingdom, they are effectively aiding and abetting Esav. Okay, so most of us are familiar with that. And then we talk about the feet of iron mixed with clay in the Revelation studies. We don't have time to unpack all that here, but let's take a look at the top of the list. So here we have Egypt with its human animal hybrids in first place with its pantheon. And then we have in position number 2, Assyria and Nineveh, also with human animal hybrids, also with a pantheon. Now, before that, we could hypothetically, if we were to put a 0 position in there, we could put Nimrod in the Tower of Babylon. So Nimrod in the Tower of Babylon is different than Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon in position number 3. But Nimrod in the Tower of Babylon, that was where we first rose up and first decided to exalt ourselves and get in Yahweh's face. And we're no longer seeking to take care of our brother. Now we're seeking to exalt ourselves over our brother and to get ahead of our brother and to get a leg up on our brother. And when you see what a difference it makes, because the one path might seem dull or stupid to the unknowing, to the uninitiated, the other pathway leads ultimately to war and destruction, as we're going to see in these coming end times. Now, one question we get, just as long as we're here, we often get a question in terms of, well, when will Ishmael be called back? When do Assyria and Egypt come to be one of 3 together with Israel? Very good question. Short answer, we don't know. Verse 17 says that the land of Egypt will be in fear of the land of Judah, which seems to speak about a time prior to the ingathering. However, verses 25, let's see if we can, verse 25 says, Yahweh of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Now, depending upon whether we're talking about only a physical reunion here, or whether we're talking about things happening here in this spiritual sequence and everything that flows from that, that remains to be seen in the years to come. So, however, right now we're at seal 6. We're effectively waiting for the sky to recede like a scroll. So then there will be the establishment of a new world order, and then it will fall apart. And then you'll have 7 years of tribulation, and then Armageddon and the ingathering and the millennium. We're not sure exactly when Ishmael will come in, and there we would believe there'll be many different groups of Ishmael that will come in over time. So please pray, brothers and sisters, for Ishmael. So now we come to our Brit Chadasha renewed covenant portion. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 18, which tells us there. So Yeshua is telling us the parable of the sower. And the sower is going forth to sow, and he's spreading the word, spreading the true good news of Yeshua as the fulfillment of Daniel 9:25 and 26. Mashiach Nagid has come, and the kingdom of Elohim is offered to all those who want to enter in, not just learn about it, but to enter in. So verse 19, he says, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and doesn't understand it. Now, what does that mean? When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and doesn't get it, he doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand that Yeshua came to take away our sins. The wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received the seed by the wayside. It didn't get into the soil. Verse 20, but he who has received the seed on stony places, like a stony heart, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself. He's not truly connected to the root Yeshua. He's only in it for himself. So since he's only looking for a blessing for himself, he endures only for a little while. Because when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Why? Because he's looking to get something for himself. Oh, now there's a cost. Now they're no longer interested. So this is also part of the 90% that's not going to make it home. Verse 22, now he who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, it gets into the soil, But the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. And let's notice here, the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches, because this is the whole thing that has happened since the watchers have tempted men, is they have made it to where instead of seeking to serve our brothers and to let Elohim bring us our spouses, we don't do that anymore. Now we're no longer hearing his voice. Now we're thought driven. And now the world is on the roadway to nuclear annihilation, effectively. So the good rabbi last week was telling us that the governments that be report to the fallen watchers. So what do the fallen watchers want except to destroy his people? Thankfully, Yahweh will intervene. Verse 22, now he who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, but the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. And brethren, I just wonder if we see this verse for what it really says. Because he who received the seed among thorns is he who reads what the renewed covenant says. Oh, but he's got other priorities. He's got other things to do. Oh, he has to meet with his friends for poker. Oh, you have TV shows you need to watch. Oh, we're worried about going to the beach or going hiking or going camping. We're worried about our children's self-esteem at playing t-ball. So those are what's called the cares of this world. And there's also what's called the deceitfulness of riches. Now, Nimrod exalted himself. Nimrod went for power. He went for money. So he went the way of the world. He went the way of the kings of this world. So he fell for the deceitfulness of riches. Now this chokes the word, brethren, because we are called to serve each other, not to rule over one another, not to get a leg up on one another, not to get ahead of each other, but to serve one another as a family to build the ideal world that Elohim wants. But it's so hard to get there because of the deceitfulness of riches, because of the pleasures of unrighteousness. These effectively cause us to quench the spirit, and this chokes the word, and hence we become unfruitful because we're no longer in contact. We're not connected with the rest of the body. Verse 23, but he who received seed on the good ground is he who hears the word and not only understands it, but he puts it into practice because he understands it. He gets what it says. And because he's applying himself, because he's truly putting Yeshua first, he indeed bears fruit and produces, some 100, some 60, some 30-fold. That depends on Yahweh. But notice the point is he's applying himself. He's putting Yahweh first. He doesn't have other priorities. He gets it. He understands what a privilege it is to lay down our lives in this world so we can invest our time, our energy in building his kingdom. So we can help Yeshua get what's his. Verse 24. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. The tare is darnel. It's a false grain. So it looks similar, but there's nothing to eat. You can't eat anything. Verse 26, but when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Did you not send 12 dedicated Jewish disciples out onto the mission field? Did you not say to walk like Yeshua walked and to worship as he worshiped? Okay, how then do you have messianics and Christians and all kinds of mess out here? How do you have tares in your Hebrew roots movement? And he said to them, an enemy has done this very clearly. Babylon, Satan. Babylon says you can worship however you want. You still get to call it the worship of Yahweh. Well, the servant said to him, do you want us then to go and gather up all the tares? You want us to take the sheep and guard them and take the goats and throw them out? He said, no, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. And that's true. When you have to discipline people and send someone outside the camp, it causes tremendous pain for those who are still on the inside. Verse 30, he says, let both grow together until the harvest, and then at the time of the harvest, in these end times, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, meaning they're going to be taken out. But gather the wheat into my barn, which is the Father's house in Israel on the Temple Mount. Verse 31, another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it's greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Now, for full disclosure, there's some discussion as to whether this is supposed to be a mustard seed or a mulberry seed, because mulberry seeds are also very small, and they do grow to become quite large trees, 50, 60 feet tall. Not sure, perhaps larger. But if it reads mustard seed, then it still is fine. It works just fine. So we still have a very small seed that when it is grown, it becomes a very large bush. And whether it's a tree or a bush, the birds of the air can come and nest in its branches. So birds of the air representing spirits. Come to verse 33, and another parable Yeshua spoke to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal until it was all leavened. Now, leaven represents sin. And you have 3 measures of meal. Meal is ground or denatured seed. And we're talking about the seed of Avraham. So we have there's 4 main groups. We're going to meet 4 patriarchs. So Judah, the black horse, he's in the head of gold. Then you have Ishmael is down there in the feet, also along with Joseph. Joseph is the white horse, but because he's still tainted with Esavite doctrine, we call him the pink horse, because he's not a clean white horse yet. He's effectively tainted with Esavite doctrine. So Yeshua said the kingdom of heaven is like leaven or sin, which a woman, meaning the spirit of Babylon, took and hid in 3 measures of meal, 3 measures of ground or denatured seed, until it was all sinful, until it was all leavened. And then you have the fires of the tribulation to burn the leaven out. And you'll have 3 leavened loaves. And Esav does not survive the tribulation. In verse 44, Yeshua tells us again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. And for joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. He doesn't need free time. He doesn't need TV shows. He doesn't need to fly his airplane. Okay, what he needs is what we all need, which is to help Yeshua get what's his. Verse 45, we have the same parable in different form. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found 1 pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. And he doesn't have a life anymore in the world. He's laid down his life for the sake of this pearl of such a great price. Verse 47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind in these end times, both good and bad, which, when it was full, they drew to shore, and they sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but they threw the bad away. And as we've seen in our other studies, 10% will be saved, and the other 90% will be thrown away. Verse 49, so it will be at the end of the age, in these end times we are entering into right now. The messengers will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, and cast the wicked into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And how many people think, I'm not wicked? But notice what Yahweh is saying here, what Yeshua is saying, is that there are those who pretend to be righteous, but are not. Those are the wicked. There are those who pretend to be disciples, but are not. Those are the wicked. Verse 51, Yeshua said to them, have you understood all these things? They said to him, yes, Adon. Then he said to them, therefore every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old. And we understand this as meaning that if we truly understand what the doctrine is, and if any man will to do his will, then he shall know concerning the doctrine. But if we truly do will to do his will, then we're able to understand what he's telling us to do in the Tanakh and in the Brit Chadasha, and then we need to be able to relate this material to people so that people can understand it without corrupting the message in any way, as the Messianic movement and the Protestant Christian church do. That's how we understand this. We will talk again about the 3 measures of meal next week when we talk about Parashat Vayera. Until then, may we please be humble and listen for Yahweh's voice and do everything that he says to do, and not fool or delude ourselves that that isn't necessary. May Yahweh be with all of us, and please pray for Brother Judah. Please pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Shabbat Shalom.